Chair Kimbrough.
Here.
Vice Chair Stedfield. Member Bagwell.
Here.
Member Bonkowski. Member McQuarrie.
Here.
Member Hastings.
Here.
Member Erb.
Here.
Ex officio member Rosenberg.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Is there any items on the agenda that may need to be moved? We only got 2.
No changes from staff.
Thank you. Any disclosures for this afternoon's meeting? Seeing none. Nobody speaking up on the TV set. All right. This is where I think I'll talk about public comment because it's up here first. So I'll read this line about public comments here. Although CAMPO often provides an opportunity for additional public comment during each specific item designated for possible action on the agenda, public comment will be temporarily limited to the beginning of the agenda before any action is taken and again at the end before adjournment. This policy will remain effective during the period of time the state of Nevada is under the state of emergency as declared by the governor due to the COVID-19 pandemic and is intended to achieve the efficient conduct of meetings while facilitating public participation via video conference and telephonic means. So next on the agenda is actually that beginning public comment period. Is there anybody on the line?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, I couldn't. No, okay, thank you. All right, so next on the agenda is approval of minutes. Do I have any changes or a motion?
I would move to approve the minutes of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization for November 18, 2020 as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? No. Okay, so motion carries. Now I'm going to go a little bit out of the meeting agenda just for a few moments here because this afternoon is the last time we're going to see Brad coming to this meeting, and I'm glad he didn't call in because we would be bummed out. So I actually feel privileged to have worked with you during this time. I think you're a very good supervisor. You're dedicated. You have no BS, and you take a lot of time making decisions, and you're very thorough. And I think that's great. And you've kind of been a mentor about how to run meetings, too. You're very excellent at that. And I'm sorry you have to leave. And as a supervisor, I'm sorry you're leaving Carson City. Somebody's going to have some big shoes to fill, I think, for the work that you do for the city. And one of the things that I always like is you work well with the staff. And I think that's always important for people that sit in the seats that you guys sit in as supervisors. You work well with staff. And they're the ones who actually have brought this forward tonight or this afternoon. So I'm going to bump this off here in a second. But so one thing I'm going to challenge you with is now you have to become a voice for this group as we try to figure out where the payment money is going to come from in the future. So hopefully you'll still be that voice for us. And then I think you really have a classy taste in cars. So I always thought that was pretty cool too, actually. So next I'm going to pass this off to Lucia because she's the one who put some nice energy into this presentation, Brad. And thank you very much. Through the
virtual handshake.
So we, staff and the board, we got you a plaque. It says, presented to Brad Bonkowski in appreciation for 8 years of distinguished service to the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission and the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. Your ideas and guidance have improved the quality of life for drivers, bikers, walkers, runners, bus riders, and all other movers and shakers like yourself. December 2020. On behalf of staff, Brad, we've really appreciated your contribution. Like Mark said, your engagement, coming prepared to the meetings, asking questions ahead of time, and really supporting RTC and CAMPO's activities. We've really appreciated it. So thank you so much. And any other board members, if you have any other comments, now's the time.
Sure, Laura, if you want to.
So I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to serve on CAMPO and RTC, and I'll reserve my other comments for supervisor levels later. But you've really been a good role model for this committee, and I think anyone that serves that they really need to do that. It's how do you work together? How do we do it as a team for the betterment of our community? And I just want to say you exemplify that at all times. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, Mark, I would start off by echoing what you and Laurie just said, and I really appreciate Brad's guidance to me on the Transportation Commission and CAMPO, and wish you good luck with whatever you take on next, Brad. It's been a pleasure serving with you.
Thank you, Chaz.
Anybody else?
Well, yeah, I have to say something. That's true. Yeah, I got to be nice. He walks by my house. No, it's been an absolute pleasure working on these two committees with you. It's something brand new to me, and you know, it's been a learning curve, and I think I've learned quite a bit from you and the other people on the commissions. So it's been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll see each other in the neighborhood. Thank you.
You know, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of you. And, you know, Mark mentioned that, you know, he said that I work well with staff. And I would say that the reason I work well with staff is because they do all the work. So I can sit up here and run the meetings, but, you know, staff and the members of the commissions, they're the ones that have the ideas and bring the input to the table. And, you know, I'm just collating it and organizing it and running the meetings and allowing everybody to have their input. And as a group, you know, we seem to always get to the right place. So I just take this opportunity to thank you all for your kind words and for, you know, being part of the last 8 years for me. You know, it's been an opportunity for personal growth for me. Being an introvert, it's forced me to be an extrovert, and as much as I've enjoyed it, I'm looking forward to getting my life back and kind of fading into the background. Although, Mark, if you call me, I'll answer your calls.
All right. Is any other comments before I move forward on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead to move to 6A for information only, presentation and discussion on the 2020 Transportation Network Monitoring Report. Oh, there she is, running down the stairs. Bouchette.
Can you see the presentation?
Yep, slides up now.
Fantastic. So this item is related to the annual monitoring report for CAMPO. We started this thing last year, so this is the second iteration of the monitoring report. And, you know, staff are monitoring different things, pavement, vehicles, crashes, bicycles, pedestrians, transit. We're doing it every day, but I think it's really important to coalesce all that monitoring into a single report, which helps us kind of elevate the discussion and look for trends and how things can work together better and more efficiently. As you all know, CAMPO covers Carson City, Western Lyon County, and Northern Douglas County. These are the census tracts that are covered. And for the most part for this presentation, I'll be using American Community Survey data, which is census data, and their 5-year estimates used in most of the charts, unless I tell you otherwise. When we're talking about mode to work, the number of workers has increased by about 3% from 2010 to 2018, with an increase of just about 1,100 workers over the time period, and about 91% of them driving alone or carpooling. That's an increase of about 1,000 vehicles during the peak commute times since 2010 through the whole CAMPO area. So not a substantial amount of increased vehicular congestion is attributed to workers commuting. And yet, even so, The average travel time to work has increased from 19.7 minutes in 2010 to 21.6 minutes in 2018. That's an increase of about 10%. So workers are traveling farther to work, or there are other additional factors contributing to slower commute times. The overall number of households in the Campo area has increased by about 9%. Thinking back 2 slides ago, the number of workers has increased by only 3% during the same time period. So what we're seeing is a larger proportion of households in the Campo area without workers. And this slide starts to help us understand why that is. The percentage of households with 3 or more household members is declining, and the proportion of 1 or 2 member households is increasing. And while the number of workers has increased by 3% and the number of households has increased by 9%, the actual population in the Campo area has declined during the same reporting period by about 0.5%. So although that may seem counterintuitive, this chart helps us to validate that the composition of Campo area households is changing. They're indeed getting smaller. And so as we monitor our transportation network, being cognizant of the longer commute times, an increase in the number of workers that's being outpaced by an increase in number of smaller size households, we can be better prepared to respond to the changing demand on our transportation network. From 2010 to 2018, the number of housing units in the Campo area increased by about 2,100 units, or 6%. During that same time, the percentage of vacant units has declined from 8.7% to 6.2%, a decrease in about 2.5 percentage points. Decreases in housing vacancy can result in farther commute times, increasing demand for longer distance vehicle trips, the need for parking on site, and potential expansion of local transit service. So we monitor that as well. The next few slides are maps. And now these are maps displaying outputs from our travel demand model. In the first yellow set, you can see the transportation analysis zones where we forecast housing growth through 2050. I'll click through these sort of quick, and I'll go back and forth a couple times. So this is forecast housing units for 2020, 2030, 2050, going back to 2030, 2020, 2030, and back to 2050. In the second blue set, you can see the transportation analysis zones where we forecast employment growth through 2050. And so I'll do the same thing. This is 2020, 2030, 2050, 2030, 2020, 2030, and 2050. Our travel demand model also forecasts delay and travel times between points within the Campo area. This table is also included in the draft regional transportation plan, and it shows distances between Campo's gateways with associated travel times in minutes. The 2015 column was produced using the previous version of our travel demand model, the one that we used in the 2040 RTP. And you'll notice some of those times are showing as much slower than 2030 and 2050. And the reason is that the I-580 freeway extension was opened in 2017. And so once that freeway was opened, those travel times to those longer destinations became much easier and faster. I'd like to draw your attention to the US 395 South, where you really see travel times clicking up and up across the various destinations. Unless or until NDOT has a willingness and available funding identified for operational improvements at the I-580 interchange and south along US 395, that segment is expected to continue to see worsening congestion into the future. The next few maps come from our model as well. Here you can see that delay in level of service and that failing level of service that exists today along US 395 South. I want to point out that this is average daily traffic, so not just the peak periods, but most of the day on average. And when you think about roadway segment level of service, you can generally think about green as traveling at or above the speed limit. It's nice and easy. As a driver, you perceive destinations to be really convenient. At level of service F is typically close to gridlock. So that's on the other end of the spectrum. It's typically very hard to change lanes or make any movements. Turning left at an unsignalized intersection can be next to impossible. And on sections with multiple signals in a row, you may end up in situations where you're far enough back in the queue at a red that you don't make it through the green before you have to wait again at the same signal. So things are really stop and go, and as communities get into that failing level of service, they may experience reduced economic activity As drivers perceive destinations to be frustrating or quote unquote taking too long, households may reduce their discretionary trip making to those destinations. So this is 2020 base year conditions. This shows 2030 where congestion is forecast to worsen along 395. We also see worsening conditions in 2030 along US 50 East, which is also an NDOT-owned and maintained roadway. And by 2050, failing conditions for the majority of the day on both of those two roadways. Quite frankly, this is what we can expect as pressures for housing push workers further and further out from the central business district and as regional growth continues. You'll note on these maps the South Carson and William Street corridors, even in 2050, are performing fairly well. With the exception of a few targeted locations, we expect to have adequate roadway capacity so long as the partner agencies continue to approve development projects that are consistent with the currently approved master plans. So if or when individual partner jurisdictions approve upzoning or higher density projects than are currently contemplated in the approved master plans today, each of those approved projects will have negative impacts on the forecast level of service shown on these maps. In many cases, in Carson City, for example, there's adequate roadway capacity, right? You see a lot of green in the maps. But it is something that we monitor and take a look at when those projects come through and staff are evaluating those projects. This map shows counter-deployment locations with speed variance. Most of our understanding of vehicle volumes and speeds comes in the form of data collected by NDOT on our larger regional roadways. CAMPO staff also collect data in-house on our local and smaller collector roadways where we receive public or staff inquiries or when designing a capital project. We also work closely with the sheriff's office. And our in-house counters can provide us with data on volumes and speeds down to the 15-minute interval, and we use it quite frequently. This map shows counter locations since 2016, highlighting locations with high incidence of speeding. And of note, Clearview and Carson River Road have been monitored on multiple occasions to have an average vehicle speed of over 20 miles an hour over this posted speed limit. This slide shows pavement condition index in Carson City from 2015 to 2020. We discussed the pavement condition index at CAMPO a couple of months ago. We had a really good discussion, so I won't go into too much detail. But the takeaway here is that current funding levels are not sustainable and we're not adequately maintaining our roadways. Since 2015, pavement condition along Carson City's local roads has declined at an alarming rate of 15%. Mm-hmm. And CAMPO now has collected pavement data in Douglas County as well, and we can compare the percentage of roadways that are failing in these two jurisdictions. In Carson City, percentage of failing roadways has increased from 24% of all of our roads in 2016 to 44% in 2020. In Douglas County, it's a similar story. That same statistic has increased from 30% of all of our roads in 2016 to 45% in 2020. And these are the statistics that really keep me up at night. As more and more roadway sections continue to see failing asphalt, there's a high likelihood of vehicle property damage but on those roadways, likelihood of declining property values potentially, and in general, the look and feel of neighborhoods deteriorates. The economic impact of unmaintained roadways can be far-reaching and substantial. So I don't want to end on a low note. Those are the key takeaways when I aggregated the data. You know, we spent a lot of time this year updating the travel demand model for the regional transportation plan, roadway funding, and opportunities to continue to optimize our roadway dollars is something that we're always looking really closely at. So those were the high points. As our program matures, we've learned a lot about best practices for bicycle and pedestrian data. I didn't spend time on that this evening, but quite frankly, we have a lot of work to do in this area, and we're looking to tackle that head on in this next year. You'll also notice that I didn't touch on transit. Staff are working on a separate monitoring report specifically focused on transit that we're looking to bring back in the next month or two to help us better understand our transit program, our fiscal health, and all of that in more detail. Myself and our team, we get really excited about this kind of stuff. We totally dork out. So if you have any questions tonight, I'm happy to answer them, or if you'd like to talk individually offline, we're always available. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Anybody on the remote world got a question?
Yeah, I do, Mark.
Okay.
Overall, I found this really interesting, the report, especially the demographic data. And I know it's not the first one we've seen, it's an update, but still, I really, it gives a good indication of what the heck's going on in Carson City and the adjoining areas of Douglas and Lyon. I did have a question about the ACS data, though, Lucia. Do you know, do they actually measure that within the confines of those little areas, or do they sort of have an overall measurement and then they use some algorithm to back out specifics?
My understanding of the ACS is they do small samples every year in each of the census tracts. And then we use they call it the 5-year data. So they take the small samples for each individual year and they aggregate it for a 5-year to give a statistically significant sample. So it really is, as I understand, the most reliable demographic data outside of those every 10-year census years.
All right. Well, that's impressive. And then I just had a couple of questions about some of the figures too. On page 21, figure 2.6, we have the household income. I just wondered if that was levelized. I mean, is that adjusted for inflation so that we're comparing apples to apples?
I believe it is. Yes.
Okay. And then on page 47, table 4.2, find that. I think, I know this comes out of the full report, which included the performance districts, but it might be helpful in future versions of this report if we had a map of those districts so that I could remember which ones are where. That's just a comment for the future. And then on page 51, I was curious. These are where you're comparing fatalities in Nevada with fatalities in the CAMPO area, and the fatalities by sort of primary category or emphasis, and the CAMPO ones add up to 100%, but the Nevada total ones don't. I mean, they add up to way more, and I'm just assuming that must mean that some fatalities are clocked or measured in more than one category?
That's a great question. That data came to us from the state. That is our understanding as well, but I can look into it and confirm.
It just has to be. And then lastly, I noticed that you had pedestrian monitoring, but no bicycle monitoring, and that may be because we really don't have enough data to do that at this point. Is that the case?
Quite frankly, we've really struggled with the bicycle data. Putting counters out in bike lanes and striped bike lanes on the side of the roadway has proven to be quite a challenge with placement of tubes, cutting of tubes, moving of tubes, vandalism of tubes. And so we're actively conversing with other agencies in the state to understand how they're doing it and looking nationally as well to really revamp our system so that we can get data that's more reliable, that staff feel comfortable communicating with the public.
Yeah, I always wondered how you actually would do that accurately, and I recognize the problem. So thank you. That's all I had. Overall, I thought it was interesting and a good report.
Anybody else on the screen? Questions?
Yeah, this is Sandra. I just wanted to provide some comments. First of all, Lucia, thank you. We like to geek out on the data as well, so it's always good to see what's happening in the various regions. I apologize, my video is kind of wonky today. I did want to take this opportunity in looking at that data to bring up a couple of issues we're looking at. As you show, if growth trends continue, congestion is going to get worse. and particularly on not-owned roads. We have a funding shortfall. We are reprioritizing safety and asset preservation more so than adding capacity in general. It doesn't mean we won't be adding capacity, but we also know that generally adding capacity to corridors doesn't actually improve operations. It ends up just encouraging that type of development that caused the problem in the first place. So we look forward to working with you, particularly on how we develop funding strategies that encourage non-single occupancy trips. And we know that there's a shortfall in funding in transit, active transportation, but there's an opportunity, and that's going to be leading a study and putting together a working group to look at sustainable transportation funding in the state of Nevada. Those of you who are aware of the SCR3 working group over the past 2 years, there was some discussion there. We anticipate a bill to be passed next session that requires us to take a look at that, but we're getting started sooner than that in terms of looking at a number of coalescing issues, from climate change to transportation funding to electrification, and how those all work together, from planning and land use decisions all the way to how we prioritize funding in the transportation system. So although those red areas are concerning, continuing to invest in the way in transportation the way we have in the past isn't going to solve those problems, and we're looking for creative solutions and creative sustainable funding sources that allow the flexibility to invest in other types of transportation, as well as maintaining the assets we have and increasing capacity where it is needed, where other situations might not work. So we look forward to keeping all of you up to informed on that study as it gets started. We look forward to your input on it, and we look forward to the opportunity to work with you on potential solutions.
Anybody else?
I did have a couple of comments just on the points that Chaz brought up. So on page 47, which is the pavement condition index, I just wanted to point out that actually those numbers should be a lot lower. However, because of the South Carson project, that bumped the numbers up quite a bit. So the averages, it also moved the averages up. And then on page 51, the fatality charts, what struck me on that was the impaired driver row on both, which is the 6th row down on the CAMPO area statistics, but it's number 1 in the state, which made me think that at the state level that a majority of accidents are being reported as impaired drivers and speed related and a lane departure and a pedestrian, where in the CAMPO area, it looks like that's a separate category that's only designated as being impaired and not in addition to another line item. So those were the things that struck me, because I had noticed the same things that Chaz had noted on that, but that to me is the one that jumped out.
I just had a couple comments. One was I couldn't believe that somebody gathered this much data at that level. I thought maybe, like for the highway, if I read it right, it looked like the most congested area was in Douglas County up at the Topsy Lane area, which just, it only goes for a little distance, and like all the cars just fell off the planet. All of a sudden there isn't that number of cars. It's weird. But I wondered, do you get reports and pay the money to get data like you can from Google and those people that have this data, and so that you can nail it to the second, and like they did up at TTD up at the lake?
That's a great question. We haven't paid for the AirSage cell phone data that they used up in Tahoe, but NDOT has been really fantastic partners, and they've helped secure a license for some INRIX data, which is similar. It's mobile source data. In the past, that license extended only to roads on the National Highway System, so it didn't really come in to tell us a lot other than the state routes. But recently we heard that license was expanded a little bit. So that's something that Dirk is on that working group, and we're looking to see if we can incorporate it and start reporting on that from that as well.
So did I understand the NDOT collects a lot of this data from even all the data on salaries and time travel and all that? Is that primarily from NDOT?
The data that we get from NDOT is primarily counts. They do vehicle volumes, and they have some big brains over there that they seasonalize it and they adjust it to kind of give it an annual daily average. And so we use the volumes on those roads is so much higher that the confidence of the statistics are just so much better that we use it whenever it's available.
Wow, it's just a ton of statistics. And you get down to the bottom line and the pavement's falling apart. And on RTC's agenda tonight, there's about $1 million contract. And how long is that piece of road for $1 million?
Not as long as you want it to be.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's $1 million.
A couple of blocks.
Yeah, 2 blocks for $1 million. And we're looking at that chart needs to be put up big on a billboard somewhere. I don't understand how that's going to work out in the future, but that's all your responsibility. And I don't have to. So good luck on that. So great report and good comments. I think Chaz likes the numbers too, I see. And it was that job is really important to establish what you need to do in the future. So thank you. So any more comments before I move on to the next agenda item? Seeing none, I move on to 6B for possible action, discussion, and possible action regarding a public transit agency safety plan and federal fiscal year 2021 performance targets for Jump Around Carson Transit. Who's got that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would likely be me, Alex Cruz.
Oh, there you are.
For the record, I'm Alex Cruz, the transit coordinator for Carson City. So the Federal Transit Administration has stated that all operators of public transportation systems that are recipients of Section 5307 FTA grant funds are required to comply with the PTASP final rule, which is in 49 CFR Part 673, in order to remain eligible to receive federal transit funds. CAMPO, as a direct recipient for these funds for Jack Transit, is required to certify that an agency safety plan is in place, as well as to provide the State Department of Transportation and its Metropolitan planning organization with safety performance targets to be integrated into the long-range planning process by December 31st of 2020. The PTASP final rule requires annual approval and recertification of the safety targets, so moving forward, this plan will be brought to CAMPO yearly. CAMPO's Public Transit Agency Safety Plan for Jump Around Carson Transit relies heavily on established processes and procedures that have been implemented by our contract operator, First Transit, which has agencies across the country. The plan integrates First Transit's safety management system with Carson City's operational and organizational structure. CAMPO's agency safety plan begins on page 85 of your CAMPO packet, and because our safety plan integrates various parts of First Transit safety plan, it has been included as Appendix 1 beginning on page 98. I'd like to point out that on page 87, the plan mentions Brad Bonkowski as the individual that will be approving this plan as chair of the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission, which is incorrect. Since CAMPO is a direct recipient of the 5307 grant funding, the individual that will need to sign to approve this plan will be Mark Kimbrough on behalf of Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. The safety agency plan includes a few important policies and targets. Annual safety targets are created, a safety management system is implemented, and an employee safety reporting program is instituted. This plan also establishes the transit coordinator as the chief safety officer who will work with the contract operator to implement the various areas of the plan. The employee safety reporting program begins on page 112 of the packet. It establishes a system for Jump Around Carson employees to use to report any issues or concerns. The program includes the protocols for reporting any incidents, near misses, or hazards. It also provides a phone number for employees to use if they feel they are unable to report to their immediate manager. It also establishes the possible disciplinary actions for any infractions. The employee safety reporting program is part of the larger safety management system. The safety management system includes monitoring, reporting, and risk management. Those three aspects will be overseen by the Chief Safety Officer in conjunction with the contract operator's general manager and operations manager, who also acts as their safety manager. The general manager and chief safety officer work closely in various areas, including the newly created safety solutions team, to ensure Carson City staff is aware of any issues and also to keep the contract operator accountable for any safety issues that may arise. The agency safety plan also includes safety targets that begin on page 88 of your packet. Being that these targets are to be set yearly, staff has decided to set the targets based on last year's safety performance, which included 0 injuries and fatalities. Jump Around Carson has set a goal of 0 fatalities, injuries, and safety events for both fixed route and paratransit. This shows that Jack is dedicated to a safe service. Jump Around Carson has also set a system reliability goal of 3,500 miles for fixed route and 4,500 for paratransit. This means we hope to have 3,500 miles between major mechanical failures for our fixed route and 4,500 miles between major mechanical failures for our paratransit. Staff is requesting the approval of the agency safety plan as well as the approval of the safety performance targets. With that, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I do have a question, Alex. If in the table 1 on page 86 of our packet, as you mentioned, the safety events are 0 and 0 for fixed route and paratransit. But in the report on page 92, it shows 3 safety events for fixed route and 1 for paratransit. Is that historical data, or is that just a discrepancy?
I think that was just a discrepancy. I believe the packet, that table might be an old table. It was originally our older safety targets. We were originally going to go with being a little bit safer with 3 safety events, but we realized that with how well we were doing last year, it made sense to actually keep it all down to 0. So it's not based on any historical data. Those are just targets that ended up getting changed that I guess just didn't make it into the packet.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mark, I had just a comment and a question. I thought it's another very comprehensive plan here, so congratulations on that. I was just a little bit shocked, I would say, that you only plan to get 3,500 miles out of a bus before a major mechanical failure. I mean, I don't change the oil in my car that often, but I'll have a major mechanical failure. And is there a reason for those, what seems to me, relatively low mileages?
Those mileages are kind of based on our how many miles we drive per paratransit and fixed route, and it kind of gives us a little bit of leeway. So last year, our fixed route actually drove about a little over 170,000 miles between all 4 of the buses, and paratransit drove about 55,000 miles. So with as often as those buses are being ran, and they're kind of running almost every day from 6:30 a.m. to about 7:30 p.m., failure is just going to happen. So we kind of wanted to account for that. Again, these are just kind of targets, so we know that if we exceed it, then we're doing better. But realistically, we're just looking at that these buses do have issues. They do break down, especially if they're running out pretty often.
So are the numbers based on sort of historical data of what's happened in the system today?
Yeah. So it's kind of based off of what we've seen, how often the buses go into fleet maintenance.
Okay, thanks.
Is that it, Chaz? Oh, I guess it is. All right, go ahead, Lori.
So
That's it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
that's right. I'd like to just kind of follow up on that a little bit. If this was based on historical, does it take into account what we think's happening because we're getting all the new buses? So I kind of just agree with Chaz. That's pretty low, or my understanding of what major is might not. Maybe that definition I'm not clear on, but is that historic across other transit systems that they're doing major overhauls or rebuilds or whatever at 3,500 miles is just.
So the numbers are kind of based on our historical data, and then we were kind of helped along by Graham over at the NDOT. So that's kind of where we came up with those numbers. And it doesn't take into account the fact that we're looking at getting a whole bunch of new buses in the coming year or two, especially because since these are yearly, we don't know how long it's going to take for those buses to arrive. So we're going to assume that using the buses that we still have right now, they'll continue to kind of break down at the rate that they've been breaking down. Some of them are a little more reliable. Some of them last a couple days, and we have another issue. So it's not really we're not trying to assume that we're going to have fully functioning new buses. We're just going off of what we have, and we'll adjust next year probably if those buses come in.
So then if we leave it this low this time, you're indicating you'll develop a methodology when you bring the report back next year. Does that make sense? We'll have a rationale for the mileage that we picked. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So, Mr. Chair, just to summarize, when we're close to making a motion, staff would request approval of the plan with the change to the signature on the signature page, as well as a change to Section 3 of the plan, safety performance targets, to match what's displayed within the staff report.
Okay. I don't I don't even think a Yugo would need 3,500 miles for a major mechanical site. Just doesn't absolutely make any sense to anybody that knows vehicles at 3,500. So, but I'm not going to stop the motion for that. But that just really confuses me that unless it was a windshield wiper, it was a major mechanical. It doesn't rain here. So just something you might think about someday when you're visiting things of what that number is to other groups or agencies that have buses in their system. But I'm not stopping the motion for that.
If I may.
Go ahead.
So I guess what we need to know, Alex, is what is the definition of a major mechanical issue? And plus, I think it would probably have to do somewhat with the age of the current fleet. You know, the older they get, the more they're going to break down. And I agree with him. With the new buses coming online, they should be, at least for the first couple of years, a lot more reliable. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yeah, and so I think a little bit of confusion is that, so that 3,500 miles is not per each individual bus. It's we're saying that, you know, of our fleet of, say, 6 paratransit buses that are constantly being rotated out, every 3,500 miles or so is where we're hoping that we would have a major mechanical issue between any one of those. So if they go longer than that, then, you know, that's obviously going to be better for us. But that's kind of where historically it's been, where, you know, maybe 4 buses are completely working, and just so happens that one day that a different bus goes out en route and the water pump goes out. So that would be a major mechanical issue. And then if another bus happens to have a failure the next day, the mileage would be probably pretty low, since it's only been 2 days between a major mechanical issue. So it's not per each individual item. It's accumulated across all the fixed route buses and across all the paratransit buses for 4,500 miles. So I think that's kind of where it's based off of the 170,000 miles on fixed route that was run by all the buses during the year, not just one specific single bus.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll add, it seems low, and it is low, and that it is what we've been experiencing. If you recall, the contract that we have currently to purchase the new buses, they're a little bit smaller in size. They don't have the air brakes. They're a little bit less complex. Their mechanics, they're not as heavy, not as long. And so we are hoping with the new buses that increases and that reduces stress both for the transit operation as well as on the city's fleet maintenance facility. So that's the goal.
Thank you. Any other comments or motion?
I would like to follow up on that. Alex, can you tell me about the approximate number of miles that the fixed route runs per day on a daily basis?
I believe it's about 100 miles per bus. It's very dependent on which route they're running. Since we have essentially 3 routes, each one's going to vary individually, but they're about 100 miles.
Okay. Yeah, that's about what I'm coming up with, about 93 and a half, just based on a breakdown every 3,500 miles and running 170,000 miles a year. So it looks like that's right.
You passed the test, Alex. Good job. Any other comments or a motion? Lori?
I move to approve the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan and Federal Fiscal Year 2021 Safety Performance Targets with the correction to number 2 on the signature page to indicate the CAMPO chair is signing, and section number 3, the safety performance targets as indicated on the staff report instead of the plan that was submitted.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second, Brad. Any more discussion? Hearing none, I call for the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Carries unanimous. Next item on the agenda are our board comments. I'll start on the right with Greg. Any comment? Brad?
Again, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of my fellow compatriots on the commission and to staff. I appreciate the fact that you've done all the work and made us look really good over the last 8 years. So thank you all very much, and I'll miss you all. Won't miss the job, but I will miss the people.
One more meeting, though. One more meeting. Lori? Any comments? No? Okay. Anybody on the TV have a comment?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I've been pretty quiet the last couple, so.
Okay, Sandra. Yeah, that's good.
Earlier, the funding study that we're going to be looking at next year, so that's upcoming. And I do want to note that the state released their the climate strategy last week. I look forward to me that sort of sets the foundation from which the hard work now needs to occur. So we look forward to furthering that effort in the transportation space. I know some of you participated in the listening sessions, so we look forward to that. That's something that is related to the funding question, but also other issues with respect to transportation. We look forward to working on that. And then Brad, thank you for your service, and it was a pleasure serving with you, and I hope you enjoy the next chapter. Have some fun.
Thanks, Sandra.
Any other comments? Seeing none. Now's the next meeting scheduled for January 13th, maybe in the Sierra Room, hopefully.
Robert Bob Kroll boardroom.
Oh, that was nice. I think I remember reading that in the paper, actually. So the next thing, is there anybody on the line from public comment?
There is no final public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And then I call for somebody to motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And when would you like to come back, Brad?
Let's make it, what is that, 5:30?
5:30 for RTC meeting. Thank you, everybody. Good meeting.
like to bring to order this meeting of the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission. It is December 9th. It is 5:30 p.m. and we are in the Bob Bolduc Theater at the Carson City Community Center. Can we please have a roll call?
Chair Bonkowski.
Here.
Vice Chair Kimbrough. Here. Commissioner Bagwell.
Here.
Commissioner Studfield. Here. Commissioner McQuarrie.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you, Tamara. We're on agenda item 2, agenda management notice. Lucia, any changes to the agenda?
We're extending for a very long time tonight, Mr. Chair.
Overruled. Any
no changes, Mr. Chair.
Any commissioners have any changes to the agenda? Please say no. All right, thank you. It's a clown show tonight. Any disclosures from any of the commission members tonight? I don't see or hear any. So we will move on to public comment. First, I will read into the record. The state of Nevada and Carson City are currently in a declared state of emergency in response to the global pandemic caused by the coronavirus. Members, let's see, the public may provide public comment in advance of a meeting by written submission to the following email, lmaloney@carson.org. For inclusion or reference in the minutes of the meeting, your public comment must include your full name and must be submitted via email no later than 3 p.m. the day before the meeting. If you wish to make public comment during the meeting, you can do so by dialing into the following number, 408-418-9388. With that, we will go to agenda item 4, our first public comment. Is there anybody on the line for public comment?
There is no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Desi. We are now on agenda item 5, approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion for approval of the minutes?
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. We are on our first action item, item 6A on the agenda for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a determination that A&K Earth Movers, Inc. is the lowest responsive and responsible bidder pursuant to NRS Chapter 338 and to award contract number 203-00194, District 2 North Ridge Drive Reconstruction Project to A&K Earth Movers, Inc. for a total not to exceed amount of $843,700 to be funded with Surface Transportation Block Grant funds with the required match from the Regional Transportation Fund. And Chris, you're taking this item?
I have this item. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this item, as mentioned, is to award a construction contract to A&K Earth Movers Incorporated for the reconstruction of District 2 North Ridge Drive project. Project is funded through a local public agency agreement or LPA agreement with NDOT using, as mentioned, the Surface Transportation Block Grant or the STBG funds with the required local match from the Regional Transportation Fund. The project is a full depth reconstruction of North Ridge Drive from East Ridge Drive to Jarbridge Court. It includes kind of those two roundabouts at Spooner Drive and at Carriage Crest as part of the project. Project length is 2,200 feet long, Commissioner Kimbrough, and it's a cost of about $350 a foot, a linear foot for that, just as reference. We had 4 contractors apply or bid on this project, and the low bidder, as mentioned, was A&K Earth Movers. The engineer's estimate was $905,000. Project, as mentioned, is funded through Surface Transportation Block Grant STBG funding with the required match of $52,088. That's a total budget for the project was $1,041,748. So we should be able to accommodate that. The bid was less than that amount, and we'll be able to cover the material testing and the construction management cost as well using the federal grant. The construction is anticipated to start June 1st and run for 60 days. We scheduled it for the summer of 2021 to kind of miss the school time with Mark Twain being nearby. If school's in session, then we'll keep that schedule. If school's not, because of other outstanding items, we could accelerate that. But at this point, it's scheduled for June 1st and run for 60 days.
There is a DBE goal on this project, Disadvantaged Business Enterprises goal of 6.06%, and A&K has committed to meeting that goal as part of the contract. So that's about all I wanted to mention. I just want to take a moment and say thanks, Brad, to you for the RTC, and with that, I'll yield for questions.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have any questions? Mark?
Well, that was great that you had 5 bids. Is that kind of a sign of the times? We're getting many more bids on projects like this, or?
Well, we had the 4 bids plus the engineer's estimate, right? And
4,
so
I mean.
I think
4. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. The time of year I think matters with bids, right? I think when we do winter time bidding, it helps get more interest so that contractors can kind of fill out their schedules for the summertime. But I think that could be a sign of the times. You could be correct.
Well, it's good when the estimate's at 900 and you come in 767. That was great. So I didn't understand the winter's demob and mob unless they're flying in them in by helicopters or something, but that was their highest item almost on the bid. But I know how they just put numbers in to get bottom line, but that was funny. So my point was made earlier about how expensive this was, so that when we ever try to explain to the public the cost, and if the roads keep deteriorating, then will be the cost for repair versus maintenance. So this is kind of an eye-opener to spend that kind of money for a few blocks there. I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that pavement costs are $2 to $4 a square foot for reconstruction of pavement, where a slurry seal is 23 cents a square foot for comparison.
Any additional questions?
Yes, a couple, if I could.
Go ahead, Greg.
Items 4 and 5 are pulverizing the existing AC. I'm assuming that since this is a reconstruction, we're basically going the same line and grade as what's there now?
Yes, generally. I mean, we're going to fix a couple of low spots, but generally it's the same right. Profile as previous.
So are those the price for those two? Does that include off-haul? Or are they reusing that material?
Yes, it would include the removal of the excess material that is that's needed to accommodate the new pavement section.
Okay. And then on item 20, adjust sewer storm drain manhole frame and grate cover to finished grade. If we're kind of with a couple of small exceptions, why we're having to adjust everything. I mean, if it's the same line and grade, then I'm just curious.
Well, what they'll end up doing is they'll have to lower those to below the depth of pulverization so that they can just pulverize the entire section, and then they raise them back up to the finished grade. So they don't want to pulverize around every manhole or every valve. They just drop them down, pulverize over the top, and then they bring them back up to the finished grade. That's my understanding of how that typically occurs.
Okay. I'm good.
Thank you, Greg. Chaz or Lori, any questions? No? All right. If there's no more questions, then I would entertain a motion.
I move to award contract number 203000194 as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Vote is 5-0 to approve. We're now on agenda item 7, internal communications and administration matters, non-action items. Agenda item 7A, transportation managers report. Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Piggybacking on the Northridge contract that you just considered, if you recall, there were a number of, a handful of accidents or crashes on Northridge over the last couple of years. Staff have been looking at some safety improvements there at one of the roundabouts. There was some property damage, and we want to make sure that that facility is safe as it can be. So now that we have the contract moving forward on the Northridge project, although it won't be necessarily part of the same project, if we have a contractor out there, we're hoping to get potentially a good price on some cost-effective improvements to help respond to some of those crashes. So we are working on that as well, and we've been in contact with the property owners that were affected by those crashes. I also wanted to announce that we heard yesterday that we have been awarded our grant application for the Transportation Alternatives Program for a continuation of our Western Nevada Safe Routes to School program. So that grant award is over $566,000 total over 2 years, extending the program. If you recall, that grant for that program uses an in-kind match, so it's really fantastic. It doesn't cost the city anything. We use utilities for Public Works building to help support that local match, so it's a really great thing. So staff are working with NDOT on the draft agreement, and we hope to bring that forward for acceptance of award to RTC as soon as possible. I also asked NDOT regarding our other TAP application, the one for the rehabilitation of Carson City's multi-use paths, as well as the extension of the linear ditch multi-use path from Route to South Carson. That grant award has been put on hold until the federal transportation bill comes forward, but I am optimistic for an update in the next couple of weeks. The other pending grant application related to our Federal Transit Administration, our FTA grant request for that innovative fare payment, the one we had a fair bit of discussion about a couple of months ago here. That is still pending. I have heard that at least 3 of the state's 6 transit operators we all applied. So the competition's steep, so we're not overly optimistic, but I will keep you posted as information comes out about that. Finally, next month, we're working on a couple big items for your radar to look forward to. Brad won't be here, so we will have an extra long meeting. CAMPO will review and consider approval of the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. And then RTC, the couple big items that will be interesting, maybe we can bring Brad back. Maybe he'll be interested enough. The staff have been coordinating with other partners in the city. We're looking to bring an item to support designation of a historic V&T rail trail through Carson City. Staff will also be looking for direction on a possible moratorium on bike and scooter share programs in Carson City. We brought an item to the Joint Open Space Advisory Committee and Parks and Recreation Commission this past month, and there was some really good discussion there and some helpful input. And then finally, I am cautiously optimistic, and Chris might laugh if I make this comment, that you will finally see the 95% design plans for the Kings Canyon project. And so I probably jinxed it, but we are optimistic about that coming back to you next month as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Lucia on the Transportation Manager's report? No? All right. Thank you, Lucia. We'll move on to the Street Operations Activity Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report is for activities as of October 2020. A couple items of note. 44.5 tons of asphalt were put into our streets for patching and potholes. Weed abatement, we did 515 gallons of weed abatement. A lot of sidewalk and flat work, a lot of concrete poured, 33 yards of concrete. And then shoulder work on asphalt road. I wanted to point out, if you haven't yet driven Edmonds, it looks really good. The crews did a really great job of shouldering out there. They hadn't been able to get to it in a couple of years, and they really spent a lot of time there and did a good job. On the backside, you'll see a lot of signs and striping work. The numbers don't look too high, but this is the time of year that we really get out there and do our best to brighten everything up and fix it up before the winter. So happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions for Lucia on the Street Operations Activity Report? Lori?
Just in general on street operations, I know that we have places where we put the green paint down for the bikes. Are we happy with that? Are we getting good use, or does it require more paint more often? Can we just have, and if you don't know the information, you can bring it back?
No, that's a great question. So the green paint that exists in town prior to South Carson was all installed by NDOT on NDOT facilities. Most notably, or at least the one I pass most often, is on the Fairview overpass. That is really bright. They maintain it, they freshen it up. They recently did a little work there, and so it got a recoat. It is special paint. It's not your normal striping paint that we use in town. South Carson project was the first that Carson City has actually applied this green paint. You'll notice it looks a little bit darker. It was our first time installing this. It absorbed a little bit into the oil, and it was also it came out a little darker than we anticipated. We're going to monitor that. We have gotten good feedback that it is helping in those conflict areas where the bike path goes through and turning into the driveways. But we may, like anything else, we'll monitor and continually improve.
Any additional questions for Lucia? All right, seeing none, then we will move on to board comments. We'll start with Greg.
Once again, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. One, it was something that touched me personally. Actually, my granddaughter went through the roundabout. It's an NDOT roundabout underneath the freeway up near me, up near the hospital, and went straight instead of the round. Totaled her car. So I thought, well, that was a bummer. So then I found out, talked to the insurance agent, and I'm a huge advocate for roundabouts, but square curbs take a lot of kids' cars. You get a lot of claims, they said, for that. I didn't know that. That's the first time I ever heard that. And I still would be a strong advocate, but maybe rounded curbs or maybe a little, the claims adjuster was talking about that she took her kids out, did special training on roundabouts because they're designed for 15 miles per hour, and they don't understand that. It's like a school zone. So I was just a comment to that I was just surprised that there were that many of them, but she had a lesson learned there. And then I have something who do I need to talk to, I think? I've rode the bike path, the new one that's not done yet, on South Carson, and there's some real dangerous things that are part of that right now. So who would I go talk to about, not that I have the authority to change anything, but to have some discussions? The push buttons were on the sidewalk, not on that. And who has the right of way? If the crosswalk and the bike's doing 15 miles per hour, I had one car who was turned in right on me. And I'm parallel with them, so I think they're assuming I'm stopping, and a lot of those pathways have stop signs at each one, so maybe they're not done, and that people are parking on the crosswalk to wait to turn. So if there's anybody who's there on those little short ends, they're in the crosswalk. So you do not want to go around the front end of them, so you go around the back end. So, and who has the right of way? Is the crosswalk have the right of way if a bicycle's going through there 15 miles per hour, or does the car have the right of way? When this guy whipped in front of me, thought he could beat me, which he did, thank goodness. So is there somebody I can have a discussion with about that and not to own it or rule it? And I know it's not agendized and I'm not looking for action, but where I might be able to get some feedback on that.
You could talk to me or Chris Martinovich, or Dan Stuckey, too, is very familiar with the South Carson project. To answer one of your questions, Nevada is a yield to bikes and pedestrian state, so which I think you knew. So they should be yielding if there's a bicycle or pedestrian actively in the intersection. Whether you'll get someone to enforce that it's
yeah. Well, when you're doing 15 down there, they don't quite picture a pedestrian standing there waiting to cross because you're moving with them. And that's not an uncommon thing with bicycles. If you're out on the roads, people try to get you to the corner sometimes. And that just happened to happen. But when people I've ridden it like 3 times now, more than a few times people are parked in the crosswalk so they can see. The stop bar's behind it, but they just pull up, which I'd understand. They want to get up close to the traffic. So just a few comments, and we'll talk then off the line, and
That sounds fantastic. And I will say that when we designed the South Carson project, staff had a lot of discussion about how we approach that multi-use path as it crosses all of those driveways in that southern section. And we anticipated that after this thing was built, as demand of that multi-use path evolves over time, that there would likely be, conversations over time about continuing to build that out as it becomes appropriate.
Yeah, the Office Depot one doesn't even give you the option to get across there with a safe pedestrian light. That was a difficult. So that's just a few comments, and that wasn't to make this a negative end, but then I'll just talk offline with you. Thanks, Lucia.
Lori? Chaz?
I would like to be involved with Mark in the discussion of the multi-use path on South Carson Street. I rode it before it was sort of officially open, but not since it's basically complete. So I need to go and do that. But I'd like to be included in that. But and other than that, just to say one farewell to Brad. Enjoy whatever you do next. That's it.
Thank you, Chaz. All right, with that, we'll move on to agenda item 9. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled in the Bob Kroll Boardroom, formerly the Sierra Room, here at the Community Center, immediately after the CAMPO meeting on Wednesday, January 13th, 2021. All right, and then finally, our final public comment. Desi, is there anybody on the line for public comment?
There is no final public comment, Mr. Chair.
All right, then we will move on to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.